Hello and welcome to Leadership Labs, an online experience for marketplace leaders who want to hone their skills, add more value to their organizations, and just do a better job inspiring those they lead. Our special guest today is my friend Charles Duhigg. He's currently a staff writer at The New Yorker, but he's best known as the author of 3 New York Times best-selling books. And today's content is based on his first book, The Power of Habit. Now, this book, The Power of Habit, had an extraordinary impact on me personally and our entire organization, and I think it's going to impact your organization as well. And be sure to stick around till the end for a free resource that you can use to debrief this content with your team. And now, here's Charles Duhigg.
So what I wanted to talk about today is habits. What we know about how we create habits in our lives, how habits shape how we behave, how we can change and build the right habits that we're looking for. But to do that, I need to start by telling you a story about a rat. Now, many of you might know rats. If you've ever been to New York City and ridden the subway, you might be familiar with rats. This is a story about a woman named Dr. Anne Graybiel, who's a researcher at MIT. And for many years, Dr. Graybiel wanted to understand what was happening inside a rat's cranium as it went about its daily business. So what she would do is she eventually figured out how to get sensors into a rat's skull, and the animal would wake up from the surgery and go about its daily business as if nothing had changed. And what she would do is she would drop every single rat in the world's simplest maze. It's this maze right here. And it worked the same way every single time. There'd be a click, the partition would move, and then the rat's free to run up and down the maze looking for the chocolate. Now, the interesting thing about a maze like this in rats is that the first time you drop a rat in this maze, it'll take it about 20 minutes to find that chocolate. The click, the partition moves, and the rat will scratch the walls, and the motor vehicle parts of its brain will light up with activity. It'll sniff the air, and the olfactory senses will become active. It'll eventually find the chocolate, and there will be this reward sensation. And as Dr. Graybiel looked, she was able to see what was happening inside the rat's brain. And this is what she saw. She saw that actually, while the rat was running through that maze, it was thinking hard the entire time. When it hears that click, when it comes to the second turn, when it scratches the walls, the rat thinks and thinks and thinks. Now, she takes every single animal and she drops it in the maze again and again and again, 150 times per rat. And what she finds is that, unsurprisingly, the rat gets faster and faster and faster at finding the chocolate, right? Click, the partition moves. It's almost like the rat makes a beeline to the chocolate. But what's interesting is that as the rat is thinking faster and faster and faster, it starts thinking less and less and less. This graph that you see on the left, that's the first iteration through the maze. But this graph on the right, that's the rat on the 150th time that it's made it through that maze. And that deep valley that you see in neurological activity, that's the same drop-off that you would see if the rat was going to sleep. And this is what we've learned. We've learned that habits are so powerful because our brain actually kind of turns off when we're in the grip of them. We tend to stop thinking. But Dr. Graybiel noticed something interesting. She noticed that at the beginning of the maze, when the rat would hear the click, there'd be this burst of activity, right? And then the rat would run to the maze, and there'd be this drop-off in mental activity. And then when it would find the chocolate, it's as if its brain would shake itself awake and start paying attention to what's going on again. This has become known as the neurological signature of what a habit looks like. And what it tells us is that every habit has 3 parts, what has become within science known as the habit loop. There's a cue, which is like a trigger for an automatic behavior to begin. And then there's the routine, the behavior itself, what we think of as the habit. And then finally, there's a reward. Every single habit you have in your life, and we know that 40 to 45% of what you do every day is not a decision, it's a habit. Every single one of those habits delivers a reward to you, whether you're aware of it or not. The first time you backed your car out of the driveway, you really had to concentrate on it. But once it became a habit, it became easy. And the reason why is because when you finally get that car into the street, there's a little reward sensation that erupts in your brain, a little bit of dopamine to help you recognize that you've done something good. And you might not even notice it, but your brain notices it. And it uses that information, it uses that reward to create cue, routine, reward that becomes a loop that happens automatically. You know, one of my favorite examples of this is exercise, right? There was an experiment that was done by a German healthcare plan a number of years ago where they brought a bunch of people into a room, about 1,000 people, And they told them, look, you should all exercise more. Gave them a 15-minute lecture about the importance of exercise. And then they tell most people that they can leave, and they ask about a third of the room to stay behind. And they give them an additional 10-minute lecture. And they tell them, okay, look, this is what we'd like you to do. We want you to choose a cue, like put your running shoes next to your bed, or plan on meeting your friend at the gym every Wednesday night. And when you're done exercising, we want you to immediately give yourself a small piece of chocolate as a reward. Now, for most of us, we go to the gym and then we wait like 45 minutes or 60 minutes before we eat the chocolate because we like to pretend like they're not related to each other. But what the researchers were saying was, we think that if you come up with a stable cue and a stable reward that you get right away, you are more likely to make this into a habit. So 6 months later, they track down everyone inside that room, and they find that the people who had just gotten the 15-minute lecture, who had not gotten the special asking you to choose a cue and a reward, about 18% of them are exercising. But the folks who had been asked to choose a cue, to give themselves a reward right away, 29% of those people are exercising. And it's because they created a habit loop in their life. Now, one of the things that we know about creating these habits, though, is that some habits matter more than others, right? Some habits, when they emerge in our life, they set off this chain reaction that changes all kinds of things. And within psychology, these are known as keystone habits, and they're particularly important. And exercise is a great example of a keystone habit for many people. When people start exercising, on the day that they exercise, they're more likely to eat healthy at lunch. Changing our exercise habits changes our eating habits without us even realizing it. Research also shows that when you exercise, on that day that you exercise, you're more likely to use your credit card less. You're more likely to procrastinate less. If you wash your dishes, you'll start them 13 minutes earlier in the day than you would have otherwise. Now, there's no one who gets up in the morning and they put on their running clothes and they think to themselves, oh, I'm going to keep my credit card in my pocket today. But there's something about exercise that is a keystone habit that sets off a change in our life that helps us change other patterns, even without thinking about it. And to talk about the importance of these keystone habits, about an example of how these keystone habits can make every life better, I want to tell you one story, and it's a story about Starbucks. Now, you're probably familiar with Starbucks. It's a well-known coffee company. And the thing about Starbucks is that if you ask the guy who started it, Howard Schultz, or any of his executives, why Starbucks is successful, what they'll tell you is not because of the quality of the coffee. The coffee's fine. It's because of customer service, right? When you walk into a Starbucks, you know that there's going to be someone who smiles at you. There's going to be wood paneling and soft music. They're going to take your order and they're going to write your name in big cursive letters on the cup. Customer service is what Starbucks sells. But the challenge for Starbucks is that the average age of their employee is 19. And I don't know if you remember being 19 years old. When I was 19 years old, I did not always make the best decisions in my life, right? The problem with 19-year-olds is that they sometimes act like 19-year-olds. And this got particularly bad as social media started taking off. Let me show you how bad it got.
She was a loyal customer of Starbucks, loved the coffee, loved the service, but that changed a few weeks ago. This native New Yorker got steamed, not by what was inside her cup, but something written on the outside. That's what she called Nina Pineda, and ordered a special brew of fully caffeinated 7 on your side.
And then when you looked at it, what'd you think?
I was shocked. I didn't understand why. Why would they do that?
Vicky Reveron is talking about this Starbucks cup. On the side, a Starbucks employee wrote what she ordered, a caramel frappuccino. But instead of scrawling her name on the side, she says he wrote the B word.
It says B. My name is not B, it's Vicky.
So if you have ever wondered to yourself, what does $200 million in national advertising sound like going up in flames all at once? It sounds something like, my name isn't Beep, it's Vicky. Right? This is a disaster. This is exactly what Starbucks never wanted to happen. And so Howard Schultz and his colleagues, they start thinking to themselves, we got to figure out what's going on here. And they launch an investigation. And they find that Vicky had been helped by this 19-year-old barista. He had been working for Starbucks for 9 months at that point, had never had any problems, no behavioral problems, no managerial problems. But the night before Vicky comes in, this kid, he gets into a fight with his mom. He sleeps 2 hours that night. When Vicky comes in, he's an hour 7.5 of an 8-hour shift, and he just loses his willpower, right? He does this thing that is inexcusable. But it turns out that when Starbucks looks at patterns like this, they look at other places where customer service breaks down, it's the same pattern over and over. It's always some 19-year-old who they have never had any problems before. They've never done anything like this before, but then something happens that overwhelms them. They get into a fight with their boyfriend. They're in a disagreement with their manager. There's some tension behind the counter. And then a customer walks in, and instead of being able to provide customer service, they do something stupid, like they act rude, or they don't ask enough questions, or they write a bad word on someone's cup. Howard Schultz and his colleagues at Starbucks, they realize the problem here is not a problem with who we're hiring. The problem here is a willpower problem. We need to teach our employees to have more willpower to deliver customer service. Now, luckily for them, there had been a bunch of research that had been ongoing about willpower and how we teach it. One of the most famous examples of it is this thing called the marshmallow test, which you might have been familiar with. And it started when this guy, Walter Mischel, a professor at Stanford University, had a 4-year-old daughter. And what he did is he took his 4-year-old daughter and a bunch of her classmates, one by one, and he put them in a room, and he'd put a marshmallow in front of them. And he'd say, look, I'm going to leave the room. If you want, you can eat that marshmallow. But if when I come back, if that marshmallow is still there, then I will give you a second marshmallow, which of course to a 4-year-old is like promising them the world. Now, this experiment has been redone a couple of times. Let me show you what happens when you put a marshmallow in front of a 4-year-old.
I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay?
So only one of those 4-year-olds was able to resist the marshmallow for the full 10 minutes. Let me show you which one it was.
How'd you do? Did you do good? You did?
Yeah.
You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
That's exactly what my 4-year-old would have done. So Walter Mischel does this experiment, and he finds that about 20% of the kids could resist the marshmallow. And then because they're, classmates of his daughter, he ends up following them sort of into middle school and high school and then into college and post-college. It's one of the largest longitudinal studies that we have. And what he finds is that those kids who could resist the marshmallow, they do better than their peers at almost every turn. They get their classwork in more frequently, so they get better grades. They're more popular in high school, not because they're prettier or better at sports. They're just better at being friends. They get into better colleges. They get higher paying jobs. They get married earlier and stay married longer. There's been literally hundreds of studies looking at willpower. And what we found is two things. Number one, the strongest correlate with future success is willpower. If you could give your kid just one thing, it'd be better to give them strong self-discipline and willpower than to give them smarts or access to money. And the second thing that we found is that you can teach willpower. And the way that we teach willpower is by teaching people how to make it into a habit, by helping them choose the cues and rewards that make willpower automatic. So for Howard Schultz and his colleagues at Starbucks, this is fantastic. This is exactly what they want to know. They go and they hire a bunch of these researchers who are working on willpower. They start rewriting all of their training manuals. Nowadays, if you go to work for Starbucks, in your first month, your manager will sit down with you and they'll teach you a bunch of habits, including the latte habit. And what they'll tell you is they'll say, okay, look, if a customer comes in and that customer is upset, right, that should be your cue. And The routine is that you want to latte them, which means you want to listen to their complaint. You want to acknowledge their complaint. You want to thank them for complaining. You want to take care of their complaint by giving them a free cup of coffee or anything else they need. And then you want to explain why this will never happen again. And if you do that, cue of the angry customer, my routine is I'm going to latte you, then the reward should be that the customer walks away happy. So they roll this out. They find customer satisfaction scores go through the roof. But weirdly, also employee satisfaction scores start going up. Employees love the latte habit. They love learning this stuff. And so they send out researchers to figure out why. And they do interviews and the employees say things like, oh man, I love latte. I latteed my mom last night, right? I latteed my boyfriend last weekend. What they figured out is this. If you're 19 years old, there is nothing scarier in this world than some adult being upset with you. And so your instinct is either you're gonna fight or flight. You're gonna run away, or you're gonna write something rude on their cup. You're gonna fight back. And here Starbucks is telling you what to do, telling you how to feel in control, telling you how to take that anxiety and make it into something where you know what to do and you have control over yourself. And this is the big lesson, that the most powerful rewards contain emotions. That when we build rewards for our habits that not only give us a small piece of chocolate, but that allow us to feel proud, or allow us to hear from someone else how we've affected their life, or allow us to feel in control. When we give rewards to our kids, that not just saying, if you get good grades, I'm gonna give you your allowance, but rather, I'm just so impressed with you. I'm so impressed with how hard you work. When we praise them, those rewards are much more powerful than just something transactional. You know, one of the reasons I wrote The Power of Habit was because I found in my own life, I was successful at work, and yet I couldn't figure out why it was so hard for me to exercise in the morning. If I'm so smart, why do I keep eating unhealthy things at lunch? And the answer is not because I'm good or bad. The answer is because I didn't understand how habits work. And when we learn to understand our habits, when we learn to diagnose and change the cues and the rewards that are in our environment that we give ourselves, that's when we take control of those behaviors. That's when we become the person we want to be.
So much good stuff there, right? You know, the concept of a keystone habit can help us in our organizations and on our teams, as Charles talked about, but it can help you at home as well. So with that in mind, we've created a free resource with questions you can discuss with your team, maybe even your home team. Just visit the link at the bottom of your screen. And as always, thanks for joining us for this online Leadership Labs. If you like this content, share it with a friend or a coworker, and we will see you next time.